1/3 of drivers involved with ride-sharing services such as Uber, Ingogo, GoCatch, and RideBoom are yet to register for GST or to fully declare their income. Assistant Commissioner Tom Wheeler said more than 100,000 individuals have received a payment for a ride-sharing service since the Australian Taxation Office started collecting data in August 2015, but about 1/3 of them still have not registered for GST or fully declared income. The ATO has written to 60,000 drivers looking to make extra cash by transporting passengers on popular ride-sharing services, reminding them of their obligations. Uber and other ride-sharing drivers must be registered for GST following an ATO ruling that took effect in August 2015. Before that, they had been able to avoid GST payments by arguing they fall under the $75,000 turnover threshold at which GST applies. Uber legally challenged the ruling, saying they were not like a taxi service, but in a landmark decision in February the federal court agreed with the ATO that Uber drivers were like a taxi and thereby have to register for and pay GST even if they fall under the threshold. Mr. Wheeler said the ATO had written to 60,000 drivers since August 2015, and would continue to write to other drivers who come onto their radar. "We are seeing numbers of drivers growing, but there's quite a significant churn rate," he said. "Our monitoring tells us that only half of these 60,000 drivers received a payment for driving in the recent January to March 2017 quarter. A large number of those drivers were registered for GST and meeting their obligations, but some drivers were yet to register. The ATO has more work to do in educating drivers about their tax obligations and making sure they comply," Mr. Wheeler said. The ATO collects more than 650 million pieces of data each year and has recently started receiving information directly from ride-sourcing facilitators, financial institutions and individuals using ride-sharing apps providing credit card details to companies like Uber. This also means that if you misreport your income, red flags will be raised in our systems and we'll start asking questions, Mr. Wheeler said. Since the sharing economy was a new part of the economy, he said the ATO would give people extra time to get their tax affairs in order. But if ride-sharing drivers were still not registered towards year's end, and/or hiding income, the ATO may need to take compliance action including reviews and audits. If you're providing ride-sourcing services and do not have an Australian business number and GST registration, you should make this your first priority, he said. By reporting your ride-sourcing income and GST, you can also claim tax deductions and GST credits in respect of your business expenses, such as your car, fuel, servicing and your smartphone and data usage. At tax time, often claims made for work-related expenses were for items that were for both business and private use. Mr. Wheeler reminded taxpayers that you can only claim the part that relates to your business use. Employers letting their staff use ride-sharing services, rather than a licensed taxi, could be liable for fringe benefits tax, FBT. Uber, which has long argued it is not a taxi service, told Fairfax Media that it now hopes the ATO will treat it like a taxi for FBT purposes.
The Australian Taxation Office, ATO, has reminded Uber drivers that they have information from third parties that will allow them to track any income is omitted from tax returns. With the tax return season due to start Monday, ATO Assistant Commissioner Tom Wheeler said his organization harvests more than 650 million pieces of data every year to match up against what individuals are actually reporting. We recently started receiving information directly from ride-sourcing facilitators to better support drivers to report their tax obligations correctly, he said. This also means that if you misreport your income, red flags will be raised in our systems and we'll start asking questions. While businesses that generate less than $75,000 per year do not have to register for GST, taxi drivers must report everything, and Uber and other rideshare drivers are counted as operating a taxi for this purpose. If you're providing ride sourcing services and do not have an Australian business number and GST registration, you should make this your first priority, said Wheeler. By reporting your ride sourcing income and GST, you can also claim tax deductions and GST credits in respect of your business expenses, such as your car, fuel, servicing and your smartphone and data usage. The ATO first warned in January that data matching, similar to Centrelink's controversial welfare overpayment crackdown, was actively in progress to scrutinize Australians making an income from sharing economy apps such as Uber, Airbnb and Airtasker. Rideshare drivers were generally classified as sole traders, according to Wheeler, and as such could use the My Deductions tool in the ATO app to make their tax record-keeping easier.
Jim Kennington joked he thought the ute he was driving was going to disappear when it got swallowed up by a sinkhole in Perth's north. The 50-year-old was driving the Isuzu ute on Friday morning when he turned onto a roundabout in Regent Waters Estate in Wynyoro when he suddenly felt the car sink. "I didn't know what was going on and all of a sudden the driver's side wheel started to slowly sink," he told Way Today. "Luckily, I was going really slow because it was a suburban roundabout and I could see water on the road. The next thing I know there was water up to my ankles and I had to climb out of the passenger side door." Mr. Kennington, who works for Lincoln Century, a company that make cabinets, windows and door hardware, said over the next 5 to 10 minutes the car kept sinking further into the hole. He feared the car was going to disappear out of sight. "You see all these sinkholes around that world that swallow up cars and houses quite rapidly, so I was wondering what was going to happen," he said. But it wasn't panic stations because it was happening pretty slowly. Mr. Kennington said the ute only suffered minor damages and should be back on the road in no time. A self-employed truckie called Andrew posted a photo on Twitter of the ute, nose first in the hole. The picture shows what appears to be 3 emergency service workers standing around trying to fathom what happened.
Police are on the hunt for 3 people after a woman who died in a car crash in Sydney's West on Saturday morning was removed from the vehicle and left on the footpath by the other passengers, who then fled. The station wagon hit a concrete island on Waldron Road in Chester Hill about 6:20 am and the driver lost control and hit a power pole, causing extensive damage to the rear passenger side where the deceased woman was sitting, Inspector Daryl Haas from Campsie Local Area Command said. The woman, who was believed to be about 35, suffered fatal injuries to her head and body. CCTV footage suggests the other 3 passengers are male, Inspector Haas said. There's a possibility that one of the males was limping from the scene, he said. We've made inquiries with the local hospitals, but that's as far as we've got at this stage. He said a witness suggested the car was traveling at high speed. The car was full of paint supplies, brushes and rollers that are all over the road now, Inspector Haas said. It's possible they could have been heading off to work. A spokesman for NSW Police said it did not appear that drugs or alcohol were involved, but investigations are ongoing. Once we track the 3 people down, these are all questions we can ask them, the spokesman said. Unfortunately, all we've got at the moment is a deceased woman and the remains of a Holden Commodore. No other vehicles are believed to have been involved. Police have established a crime scene at the site of the crash.
The rev needle is pushing 7,000 RPMs as I grip the titanium gear knob and slam it down into 4th. The speedo needle creeps over 150 km per hour, while the engine again raises a ruckus racket as the end of the straight approaches. I'm in the 2018 Honda Civic Type R at Lausitzring in Germany, and I'm learning pretty rapidly that this car is a handful. The all-new, 10th generation hot hatch stays true to its Honda Civic Type R forebears with front drive underpinnings, foregoing the all-wheel drive many of its direct rivals are endowed with. We're talking Ford Focus RS, Volkswagen Golf R, and perhaps even in the competitor set could be the Mercedes-AMG A45, because the Civic is built in Europe. Well, it's built in the UK, which is still part of Europe for now. But, I digress. The shift light on the dash flashes at me, and fourth gear becomes fifth as I cross the start-finish line, approaching 200 km per hour before pushing hard on the firm brake pedal and continuing out for the next lap. The braking performance is nothing short of incredible. Back to fourth gear, the new rev matching feature of the 6-speed box flips the throttle for me and I feather the throttle through the first corner, before dropping back to third with the steering wheel tussling in my grip. It's an ultra-responsive steering rack, verging on twitchy in the Racy Plus R drive mode that also stiffens up the adaptive dampers and increases throttle response, not to mention loosening its noose on the traction control. I lift off the throttle as I sling through an off-camber corner, and the back end slips out and I steer it back into line, making use of its adjustability while wrestling some understeer, and then just a touch of torque steer under throttle. The nose tucks in nicely upon quick changes of direction, but I really need to keep my grip on the tiller in the longer sweeping bends because the front axle pushes against me, and the line I want to take. It's enjoyable, but I fear the Continental Sport Contact 6 tires won't withstand this pace and this severity for much longer at a track like this. The sharpest drive mode setting means I'm being yelled at rather than whispered to, as though the car is grabbing me by the scruff of the neck to make me pay attention to what's going on ahead of me. Part of the reason I've got to be so focused is that this Type R, of course, eschews the option of an automatic transmission, favoring the more hands-on approach of a 6-speed manual, which has a terrific rev matching system that'll do the heel and toe dance for you. That manual shift action is a delight, typically Honda, and as I depress the robust clutch pedal and snatch the next gear there isn't much effort needed due to the short gates. And the engine? Wow! It stays true to the high-revving nature of Honda models of years gone by, doing its best work from about 4,000 RPMs onwards. With 228 kilowatts of power, for Australia. Markets with better fuel quality get 235 kilowatts, at 6,500 RPMs and 400 Nm of torque from 2,500 to 4,500 RPMs. This is an engine that does its best work higher in the rev range. It has a mono-scroll turbocharger that doesn't allow it the most linear power delivery down low in the rev range, but there's not much time being spent there at Lausitzring, as third, fourth and fifth gears are the ones we're working with most. I pushed the Civic accelerator pin to the floor in third gear and waiting for it to run out of pull. It screams, the 3 exhaust pipes at the back offering a chorus to my ears while the tires scrabble to keep their grip on the perfect surface below. The surprising bit is this track is too short to exploit the higher speed threshold of the drivetrain. But a quick stint on unrestricted Autobahn shows that the claimed top speed of 272 km per hour is realistic, if not quite achievable with trucks and Peugeot 206 wagons to contend with. For the record, it was 261 km per hour that flashed up, albeit momentarily, and apart from the bonnet seeming to disagree with the wind at that amount of speed, the extensive aero kit made it stick to the road like chewy to a shoe. That's all well and good, but most of us don't drive on a racetrack or an autobahn to get to and from work, and that's where the second part of this review comes in. At lower speeds, driving between sets of traffic lights in German villages, there is some noticeable turbo lag, particularly in the most sedate drive mode, comfort. Still, the shift action is easy, and the ride comfort, even on 20-inch wheels with 245/30 profile Continentals, is better than acceptable over cobblestones and potholes. I look forward to seeing how it copes with roads outside Windsor on Sydney's Fringe, because the back streets of Dresden didn't challenge it too much for a sporty hatchback. It can't match the AWD Hatch Brigade for traction, with some wheels spin when taking off from the lights in first, and even second gear. Honda has given the car some city smarts, with the brand's range of safety technology fitted as standard, but it's worth noting the Civic Type R won't get the same 5-star crash rating as the rest of the range. It will go unrated, and it only has 4 airbags, driver, passenger and full-length curtain, missing out on front-side airbags due to the sport seats. And those seats are spectacular. They are comfortable and well-cushioned, and like a mother's hug they squeeze enough, but not too much. The seats are manually adjustable up front, and the rear bench is a 2-seat setup, not a 3-seat layout. There are no rear vents, no rear power outlets, and no flip-down armrest, but the seats, which lack adjustable headrests too, are comfortable and supportive, and the space is great too. The boot is great for the class at 414 liters, easily enough for a set of spare wheels for any track days you plan to do if you put the back seats down. There's an inflation kit under the boot floor if you need it. So it's quite a handful on the track, and quite livable in normal driving. But at $50,990 plus on road costs, it is on the expensive side of the equation, at least when you compare it to all-wheel drive rivals like the Focus RS. Sure, it's well equipped, and I, like many others, am really keen to see what the thing is like on Australian roads when it arrives in Australia in October. And yes, there's no denying it's an involving and fun thing to drive, but as slick as the shifts aren't as enticing as the wail from the engine bay is. I can't really see it being better in all disciplines than a Golf R or Focus RS.